Hello, everybody, and welcome to your second class for Introduction to Sociology. And we're going to talk about research methods. Now, in the first class, the focus was on sociological theory, specifically functionalism, conflict theory, symbolic interactionism, and feminism. Like I said, now we're going to focus on research methods. And this is the only time in the entire course that a chapter will be divided into. Now, in every chapter, the textbook repeatedly refers to research. In the extra examples I include, I refer to research. And this is a phrase you'll often hear people just randomly include in their conversations, usually when they're trying to prove themselves right about something, or even just trying to persuade you or someone else that what they're saying is true, that their point of view is correct. Well, research indicates, or I saw something on the news and they said that there's been research concerning this subject. What does that mean? For me, I automatically think, who conducted the research? A research firm or some popular website? What kind of research method were used? How many people were studied? 100 or 5,000 or more? Was the research conducted ethically? Were people paid to participate or not, which might affect their participation and their responses? Did they know they were being studied, which might also affect their behavior? So for me, the questions go on, ending with wanting to know if it was valid research, meaning that it was conducted well so that the results represent what they say they do. In other words, to use a very unacademic phrase, was it good research so that the results should be taken seriously? This is why, since I began studying sociology as an undergraduate student, which just happened to be at Nipissing University, I have tended to take research results in popular media with a grain of salt. After studying how research is actually conducted and how to analyze the results, I never look at the results of any kind of study again in the same way, because I learned how easy it is to lie with research results to make the results say what you want them to say. How easy it is to get the results you want to get because the kind of questions you ask or how you ask them. Basically, I learned how easy it is to lie with research and statistics. In fact, when I was in university, one of the books we were required to buy for the research methods course was called How to Lie with Statistics. So studying research methods, I learned how easy it is to manipulate people's perspectives and opinions with research results. So the term research itself refers to the process of systematically observing reality to assess the validity of a theory. And this is used in every single academic discipline in the world, as well as in several ways not directly related to academia. You could potentially study anything if you have the interest and the time or the money to do so. And the text hops right into this by explaining the research cycle and the 6 steps involved. But before we get to that, we need to talk about ethics and research first, because this is something that must necessarily be taken into account no matter what the subject or how the research will be conducted. When conducting research in the social sciences, it is extremely important to take into account ethical and moral considerations. And whether you want to be ethical in your research or not, you don't have any choice in this because there are laws in this regard. You can't just study whatever you want in whatever way you want with no regard for ethical considerations or moral considerations. Now, although the title of this part of the chapter refers specifically to sociological research because this is a sociology course. The information provided about ethics and morals in research practices applies to all research and all disciplines, no matter who the researchers are, what their area of study is, what the purpose of the research is, or who the participants are. And the text points out that when research is conducted, a researcher must, in all situations, respect the rights of potential respondents or participants. And this means something very specific. It's not just some vague idea, oh, you need to protect the participants. This actually refers to very specific things. The first is respecting the rights of subjects means that researchers must do the subjects no harm, that the subjects must be safe at all times, physically, emotionally, socially, in every way they must be safe. And please note that when I point out this is much more than physical safety. If a subject is going to find themselves suffering from any kind of emotional trauma as a result of research, or social trauma by being stigmatized, for example, that's an ethical problem, which means the researcher cannot guarantee their safety. If the participant is going to end up feeling like they've caused somebody else harm, or that they've done something unethical as part of the research, it could have a lasting effect on them, psychologically speaking. And I'm going to give you some examples of this throughout this class. Secondly, respecting a subject's rights means they have the right to privacy. If a participant does not want their behaviors or attitudes or thoughts or feelings or what they do made public, then they should not be made public. Now, sometimes research is very general in nature and it's kind of focused on simple topics, and sometimes it's focused on something that is highly sensitive. In both situations, your subject has a right to privacy. Now, you might look at a topic and not understand why a subject wants their feedback to you to remain private, because to you, the topic is not one that necessitates privacy. But it's the subject's right, whether you like it or not. And just in everyday conversation, some people have a tendency to be very open with others. So to talk about their spouse or their children or experiences they've had, while others are intensely private. And as a researcher, you have to assume privacy is the desired state and take steps to ensure that. In addition, subjects have a right to confidentiality. And what this means is that it should not be possible for any data collected from them to be traced back to them. This is linked to the right to privacy, their right to remain anonymous, to not be identified. So, for example, sometimes questionnaires or surveys are coded in order to ensure the answers cannot be traced back to the respondent. So you'll see a number at the top of the first page in the corner so that it can be identified where the questionnaire comes from, but not from who. And this is very, very common. This is not unusual at all. Now, your text makes the point that subjects have to be told how the information they provide you will be used. Again, so that they know what they're agreeing to. I can't tell participants that I'm conducting a survey of first-year university students focusing on perceptions of and use of alcohol to fit in socially speaking, but then take those results and use them for research regarding sexual activity of first-year university students. You can't do that. If you provide information to somebody, they have to be clear and honest with you regarding how that information will be utilized. And you have to have informed consent. I want you to highlight that term, informed consent. underline it, bold it, italicize it, put it in some kind of different font, because informed consent is that important. This means that subjects must be made aware of the degree of personal risk involved in participating. This is the buzzword or words when it comes to ethics and research. Now, the concept of informed consent is one you'll hear used again and again. And it means that a person is going to willingly participate after being told of all aspects. Essentially, they have been honestly and clearly told what they are getting into and what will be involved, including any possible risk. It means telling potential research participants about all aspects of the research that might reasonably influence their decision to participate. They have been completely informed and they still consent to participate. And you'll often hear this phrase, informed consent, used as a kind of catch-all term to describe ethical research, and not in a negative way. It's used as kind of like a summary phrase that implies everything I've just outlined. So it doesn't just mean something simple. Informed consent actually refers to a whole series of issues, and it's extremely important. Now, perhaps the best way to demonstrate ethical and moral issues in research is to review an example where these concerns were not given much consideration at all. To review an example of research that was very unethical in its design and how it was conducted. In the last class about sociological theory, I mentioned what is referred to as the forbidden experiment. Purposely isolating somebody to study the effects of that isolation. Of course, that would raise ethical and moral concerns. That is a very clear example of research that would never take place because it violates everything I've just explained. But I'm going to give you an example of how a very well-known example of research when ethical and moral considerations were not considered at all. That occurred not that long ago. The Tuskegee syphilis study is very well known, and it was a study conducted from 1932 all the way up to 1972 by the United States Health Service. Yes, by the government. The true intended purpose of this experiment was to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis in rural American men, African American men in Alabama, under the guise of receiving free health care from the United States government. So I want you to think about what I just said. Syphilis being left untreated on purpose to see how it would progress, with the participants thinking that the purpose of their participation in the study is about improving their health. Now, when this study first started in 1932, there was no known effective treatment for syphilis. I think most people are aware that syphilis is a disease that is usually transmitted sexually. And most people think that is the only manner in which it can be transmitted. But actually, it can also be transmitted from a mother to child during pregnancy or at birth. So it's not just a sexually transmitted disease. So what this means is that even though women were not officially being studied, they could potentially contract the disease during intercourse with the male partner and then unknowingly pass it on to their child during pregnancy and birth. In collaboration with Tuskegee University, researchers enrolled approximately 600 rural African American men, all of whom were extremely poor, in a community in Alabama. When the study began, about 2/3 of the men had the disease and 1/3 did not. Yes, the men freely agreed to be examined. They freely agreed to participate. There was no intimidation or coercion at all. But they thought They would be treated for syphilis if they had it as part of the study, as part of their participation. For those that did not already have syphilis, they were told that they had quote unquote bad blood. Now, this phrase, bad blood, was a common kind of catch-all term used at the time for a variety of health complaints. So if somebody was feeling run down, or if they were tired and fatigued all the time, if they generally didn't feel well on a regular basis, it was thought they had bad blood. During the study, the men were given periodic assessments during which they would be fed, and they were told they were being provided treatment either for syphilis or for their bad blood, when in fact they were not. The treatment of all of them was actually a placebo, which means a fake medication. They were simply vitamin supplements and aspirin. And the doctors knew they would have no effect on the disease of syphilis. So what the participants saw was that they were periodically provided a meal, free medical care when most of them had never seen a doctor a single time in their life because they were so poor, as well as free burial insurance, which might seem odd to us, but this was a huge deal because they knew that whenever they died, their families would most likely not even have the money necessary to bury them. So, for participating in the study was something they felt they simply could not turn down. These were not just lower status people, these were people who were dirt poor, many of them who had little to no education. So the study started in 1932. The thing is, in 1947, penicillin became the standard treatment for syphilis. Yet the Tuskegee researchers continued the study without treating a single participant. They withheld penicillin from the men. They even withheld information about effective treatment from the men. And the researchers went further, and they took steps to prevent participants from accessing syphilis treatment programs available to other residents in the area. They didn't want participants seeking treatment elsewhere. So they did what they could to make sure anybody participating in the study would not have an opportunity to go and access healthcare somewhere else. This study continued until 1972, and the only reason it stopped in 72 was because a young doctor leaked information to the press, which caused the whole experiment to become public. So, throughout this entire time, researchers provided no effective care for the participants in the study as the men died. Some went blind. Some suffered from mental problems and became insane because of the syphilis. And some experienced other severe health problems due to their untreated syphilis. So, if not for this young doctor who leaked the information to the press, none of this would have stopped when it did. By the end of the study, 28 people had died from the disease, 100 had died from related diseases, and 40 wives and 19 children had been infected with syphilis. Clearly, there are several ethical problems with this study. Every single ethical and moral consideration I outlined was completely ignored. The first of which being the researchers did not even attempt to provide safety for the subjects in various ways. There was no thought of do no harm. Instead, they actually withheld or interfered with treatment for research purposes. There was little to no privacy provided, and confidentiality regarding information, that wasn't considered important either. Participants had no idea for what purpose the information collected about them would be used because they did not know what information was really being collected. And lastly, there certainly was no informed consent. There was also the issue of feeling pressured to participate. Now, I pointed out that there was no coercion, but that is not entirely true, as it is widely acknowledged that the researchers took advantage of these men who were living in impoverished conditions. Some, even though they were adults, had never had any kind of health care ever in their life. The majority had very low levels of formal education. And because of this, they viewed the people they had contact with for the experiment, so like the doctors and the nurses and researchers, as authority figures, as experts, as people they should defer to because they were formally educated. Once the Tuskegee syphilis study was exposed, it led to major changes in U.S. law, including new regulations regarding the protection of participants in clinical studies. Research now requires informed consent. The clear communication of a diagnosis, if applicable in this situation, and accurate reporting of test results to participants. So this is why the Tuskegee syphilis study is cited as, quote, arguably the most infamous biomedical research study in U.S. history, end quote. From our perspective now and our society's focus on human rights, it's pretty stunning to think that this happened in North America and that it went on for as long as it did with no regard for the men involved or their families. How can somebody do that? Other well-known examples of unethical or immoral research included the Milgram study in 1974, when a psychologist named Stanley Milgram decided to study how willing men would be to obey the instructions of an authority figure, even if the instructions included something that conflicted with their personal conscience and values, like causing harm to somebody else. So you have this fake test subject who is totally in on everything that's going on, and you've got the experimenter. And what would happen was the experimenter, I can't remember if it was the experiment or the subject, would read a question to the fake test subject. And if they got the question wrong, the subject would be expected to administer a small electrical shock to them. And they were told that the fake test subject, who they didn't know was fake, had these electrodes or whatever on them. And every time the fake test subject got an answer wrong, the level of the electrical shock would go up. Or at least that's what the subject thought, because again, this was all fake, but they didn't know it was fake. So how high would they let the electrical shock go to punish the other person before they said to the experimenter, who was the authority figure, no, I'm not doing it anymore? The Stanford prison experiment occurred in 1971 and focused on how people perceived power. It was conducted at Stanford University and studied the problems between prisoners and prison officials by constructing a fake prison in the basement of a university building. They then used voluntary student participants to fill each of these roles. And they tried to create as much as possible a real prison dynamic to do so, trying to replicate the power struggle of authority. Now, another ethical issue regarding research that the textbook mentions that I want to bring up briefly. Something that people often don't realize is that there are also ethical concerns regarding how research is handled, how the results are handled. Plagiarism is a huge concern in this area, and unfortunately has grown significantly with access to the internet. And with this access to hundreds, if not thousands, of sources with just a few clicks. This is why universities and colleges now commonly provide access for their professors to programs like SafeAssign or Turnitin.com that check for plagiarism for professors. Now, reading the text, you'll see that it expands on this. Academic information, academic research, what belongs to who. Is it their academic property? Is it the result of their work? People who are not familiar with academia, and even some of us who are familiar with it, often don't realize how much of a big deal it is to use somebody else's results. It is absolutely theft of somebody's academic property, and because of this, it's taken very seriously. And even as a university student, claiming you didn't know it wasn't allowed or you didn't realize how serious it was is simply not an excuse. It's an ethical issue. So don't do it. I'm shaking my finger at you. So that's like an introduction to research methods to begin with. And now we're going to move on to the research cycle. And yes, this is even the same research cycle that maybe you used in junior high, with that Bristol board, and then you cut a piece of Bristol board in half and you have the wings at it for your science fair. I'm going to discuss each of these in detail. I'm going to give lots of real life examples of each. I'll be adding in a few terms not included in the text, but I don't want you to worry about it. If I do bring in something not included in the textbook, it will be with the purpose of helping you to understand something in the text. So let's get going with the research cycle.